So this piece is a painting by Kongtaveelert. And essentially what he did was that he used crayons, oil paint, watercolor, and scribbles onto a blank white canvas. And then it's really important to recognize that he's a renowned abstract expressionist. And for some weird reason in this world, his work actually cost about $70 million in a New York Sotheby's auction, just by scribbling. But a more clear example of this would be these two paintings in the series of Robert Ryman's white paintings. And he's a driving force in the minimalism movement at the time, but essentially, these two paintings are just white oil paint layered onto a white canvas. Still, these pieces are held of high significance, and many people are willing to pay millions of dollars for it. And that really made me question why these pieces meant so much to someone. But the most outrageous example of all would be this urinal. And it's not just a urinal, but rather an art piece by Marcel Duchamp called Fountain. And what he did was that he bought a urinal from someone else. He did not take part in processing it at all. And then he put it on a stand and then signed his name. And then, wham, that's his work. And all of these works fall under the category of modern art. And when we see these works, well, I don't know about you, but I obviously had said I could do that when I visited these kind of museums before. But I am here to tell you today that the I could do that should be I could not do that, and tell you more about why we should appreciate modern art and art in general. And so before diving further into the topic of modern art, let's get a general idea of what modern art is. So what I'm referring to as modern art is an art movement happened during the late 19th century, carrying on into the early 20th century. And so this movement is rather radical. And by saying radical, I mean, imagine how in classrooms, in schools, we were taught how to copy an object or do a direct observational to create fine details onto a canvas or a drawing. Modern art took a different approach. It's much more experimental and abstract. And so there are two key reasons why this is so. So the first reason would be that, following the timeline, modern art comes after the Great War. And as you can probably imagine, at the time the society was in so much pain and trauma, such that some art movements, such as Dadaism, took a different approach in doing art by just rather than embracing its roots, it's denying all cultural ties that build up what art is and all the nationalism that was sentimental at the time. But the second reason behind this change in stylistic choices was how, at the time, there was an advent of camera. And prior to having camera in society, what artists was meant to do was that they were meant to create landscapes and portraits for patrons. But now with this camera, which can realistically record these sceneries in such a short amount of time, artists were motivated to do something else. They were pushed to experiment with the materials at time, and instead of just trying to satisfy the patrons all the time, they did some work that was more personal and representing that community. And so, even though the artworks becomes much simpler, there are really minor steps that we obviously ignored. And so this painting is a traditional painting, and it's actually created by Pablo Picasso early on in his career. And instead of these kind of paintings, we remember Pablo Picasso as these kind of paintings, which is in the style of Cubism later on in his career. And this is not to say that suddenly Pablo Picasso had become someone else of less value because he can't paint realistically before. Obviously he could. But what he did here was just shifting the vehicle he used to communicate his ideas. Instead of using realism to explain his thoughts, he shifts to abstraction. And that's cool. And even if we could replicate an artwork, it's really important to recognize that our work wouldn't be of the same significance as the original work. For example, remember Robert Ryman's white painting? It's actually not really easy to create. And so if you look closely into his work, there's actually subtle hue variation on the white canvas, and there's many whites within the white. And the textures on the canvas is really interesting. So not only is his work really conceptually hard to do, but it's also really technically hard to execute as well. And so even if you manage to create the work, your work wouldn't be of the same significance. This is because at the end of the day, what really matters is that is how you are able to communicate your ideas. You could scribble like sci-fi, but your work wouldn't be a reaction to the build-up of the society after the war. You could paint white on a canvas, but your work wouldn't be a reaction to abstract expressionism, which was another ongoing art movement at the time. And you could put a urinal on a stand and sign it like Marcel Duchamp, but what you created wouldn't be your response to the war or the depiction in existentialism at the time, like his engagement in Dadaism. But another reason I really like art and modern art specifically was because it behaves as a voice of the voices in the society. So let me give you a few examples. So these two posters are by the Guerrilla Girls, and they were the driving force in the feminist art movement at the time. And what they did was that they painstakingly count the number of single-person female art show in New York during 1985 and 2015, 30 years later. And you can see that there's a slim change being created, but it's really significant to consider that, because even though the change is slim, there's still some change that happened because of their because of their effort and other activists who really made us question why gender should be taken into consideration when art is being exposed. Closer to home would be Kun Wasan Sitiket. Wasan Sitiket is a Thai multidisciplinary political artist who I've had an opportunity to interview over the break. And his work deals directly with how Thai governance wasn't as good in his mind, and how the young and the lower income families were taken advantage of. And through interviewing him, he really resolved my concern about art. Because one of the questions I always had is that since art is such a niche market, how could it create a big impact? And so what he's suggesting was that even though art is able to reach a small community, it has reached a community of people who have had more opportunities than others, and who might potentially grow up to be someone who have the power to change. And to conclude my talk, I would like to demonstrate my points through my work. And so this is a painting I created with a span of a few weeks. And you may question, weeks? How is this splashes of white, of colored paint on a white canvas actually caused a few weeks? And this is because this work is a response to flooding, and going on behind me is the process of it. And so what I did at the time was that, since for me, flooding has 3 factors into it: deforestation, littering, which blocks the water flow, and mismanagement. And so each concern I have about flooding was portrayed through different mediums. And so deforestation was portrayed through linoleum printing, littering was portrayed through plastic and wire sculpture, and mismanagement was the process in executing this work. And so I think my final conclusion would be that in the end, even if we don't like the final product, or even if it doesn't look that ambitious, it's really important to recognize that there has been many thoughts and ideas and effort put behind it. Just like how you read a book and you still, even if you don't like the storyline, you still appreciate that someone has taken the time and skill to write that. And writing a book is something really hard to do. The same goes for art. I think my final, really, the whole point of this is that when you go to an art museum next time, instead of saying, I could do that, take a step back and really appreciate that this work there has been many steps going on behind it that we do not recognize. And instead of writing it off, taking the time to really consider how it creates an emotion within us and how we learn from it. Thank you.